may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
All right, so I know the past few videos we've gone through, we've talked about some players that I really like drafting this year. That's not my style. My style is to come out here, talk about guys that I think are being drastically overvalued, get some hate going in our direction, because y'all know I live off of that hate. So let's talk about a wide receiver that I am not a fan of in the slightest. A wide receiver that I would probably not draft in a single league if I draft 100 drafts this offseason. But of course, we are going to dive into exactly why later on in the video. But beforehand, please guys, go down there, drop that like, get this video over 250 likes before tomorrow's. That way we'll have timestamps on the video tomorrow. Go down there, subscribe to the channel. Let's continue to grow that subscriber count. And lastly, we do have our official Dynasty rankings for that Dynasty Fantasy Football channel we run over there on Patreon. But I want to remind everyone, this is not the Dynasty channel here. Here we are going to be talking 2021 projections. We're going to be talking about Diontae Johnson. Oh my gosh, a Diontae Johnson that is going way too high in fantasy drafts right now. And let's just dive into it. Because right now, Diontae Johnson is going back-to-back with Robert Woods. Now, I will say, I very rarely see anybody take Diontae Johnson ahead of Robert Woods, but they're right next to each other in ADP. So I'm assuming maybe it's just happening in some drafts where I'm not in them because, I mean, the ADP is there for a reason. He's going ahead of DJ Moore in a lot of drafts, and that's what I am seeing. I am seeing people take Diontae Johnson ahead of DJ Moore, which I don't understand. I would never do on my own right. So he's being drafted as the wide receiver 19. And if we pull up what he did in 2020, I mean, I'll be the first one to admit, well, Diontae Johnson in 2020, his second season in the NFL, he finished as the wide receiver 19. And naturally, you would expect those wide receivers to be able to continue to progress through their NFL careers, which, I mean, maybe we can say it's understandable that people are drafting him at the same mark, but how he got that finish is what is so concerning to me, because Diontae Johnson finished as the wide receiver 19 with almost 10 targets a game. Now, let me repeat that. Diontae Johnson finished as the wide receiver 19 with almost 10 targets a game. With those 10 targets, he had about 5.9 receptions a game. He had 61 receiving yards a game and 7 total touchdowns. So I know you're probably wondering, well, Mason, if he had almost 10 targets a game, how is he finishing as the wide receiver 19? And to simply put it, Diontae Johnson, I don't call him the worst wide receiver in the NFL last year with that volume, but Diontae Johnson was definitely one of the least efficient wide receivers in the entire NFL last season. Now, I know a lot of people are going to think, but Mason, is this just due to the drops? And no, it's not just due to the drops, which I know a lot of people want to point out with Diontae Johnson, which honestly doesn't necessarily matter that much. Usually when a player has a drop problem in fantasy, it's going to be way overblown, and I would prefer the player to just be able to get open and get the target rather than us having to worry about drops at all, because drops 9 times out of 10 will get corrected in the NFL. I mean, that's why maybe I'm taking the discount we get on Evan Ingram later in drafts right now. So don't be worrying too much about the drops with Diontae Johnson, but I want to focus in on the lack of efficiency here. So like we previously stated, 6.4 yards per target. That puts him at 117th overall in the NFL. Guys, 117th overall simply never happens for a wide receiver that is seeing close to 10 targets a game. Now, I wish I had the time to go through and do historical research on this, but simply I know that it would probably take us 30 years to find this kind of lack of efficiency with this target volume. So I didn't want to go through and do that. But to show y'all how rare this is for a wide receiver to be so inefficient with this large of a workload, let's look up players that finished ahead of Diontae Johnson in their yards per target. So players that were doing more than Diontae Johnson on a per target basis last season includes Hayden Hurst, Drew Sample, Jamal Williams, David Johnson. Let me repeat that myself. David Johnson, not David Johnson from 2017. No, David Johnson from 2020, and Dalton Schultz. Now, there are also over 100 other players on this list, but I want to talk about the guys right over him and just show how embarrassing this truly is. Now, another way that you can kind of frame this to show how bad Diontae Johnson actually was with the targets that he had is last season, Diontae Johnson, if we take out on a per game basis, because I know a lot of people don't like looking at that, and especially if we're viewing it through this context, it's going to be meaningful because Diontae Johnson did leave some games early. So when you're leaving games early, obviously that's going to impact what you're having on a per game basis. But here with Diontae Johnson, on an overall standpoint, he finished as the wide receiver 18 in fantasy last year. And he finished as the wide receiver 6 in the NFL in targets. And obviously, no wide receiver ahead of him in fantasy was targeted more than Diontae Johnson. I mean, the only wide receivers that accrued more targets than Diontae Johnson last season were Keenan Allen, Davante Adams, Allen Robinson, DeAndre Hopkins, and Stephon Diggs. Now, the finishes for those wide receivers all were within the top 10 on fantasy points at the end of the season. Davante Adams at 1, Stephon Diggs at 3, Hopkins at 4, you have Allen Robinson at 7, and Keenan Allen at 9. So you find, well, all these other wide receivers that are getting that volume on a season-to-season basis are actually coming through with an insane amount of production with that volume and not necessarily having to be extremely efficient. But what you do have to have is you have to have a baseline level of efficiency. That way you can maintain that volume and the game plan isn't going to go away from you. And that's what I'm worried about here with Diontae Johnson, because I don't see how Mike Tomlin, Ben Roethlisberger, and this entire organization go into 2021 with the same game plan of getting Diontae Johnson close to 10 targets a game. And this is because the situation is not nearly as good as what you had last year for Diontae Johnson. So Diontae, 24 years old, the same exact age as Juju Smith-Schuster. I mean, Juju, a wide receiver that I know had a down year the past 2 years, to be completely honest. But we know Juju has the talent. The question, if he can stay off of social media long enough to care about his NFL career, is a different story. But regardless, Juju does have that same talent, and it's not like Juju is about to fall off the map completely. And what's very important here is Chase Claypool going into year 2. Chase Claypool is now going to be able to see more targets in this offense, and you see that being projected with Claypool going in a very similar range in drafts compared to Diontae Johnson. And given the efficiency that you had from Chase Claypool last year, it would make a lot of sense for this team to decide to try to get more balls in the direction of a Chase Claypool compared to a Diontae Johnson. And even with the market shares changing on this team, because you're going to be expecting that pretty much everybody is going to be putting Diontae Johnson in a touch squeeze. You're going to be expecting Najee Harris to be getting more targets out of the backfield than what you had with Benny Snell last year. You're going to be expecting Eric Ebron, year 2 in the Pittsburgh Steelers offense. Maybe he himself doesn't see more targets per game, but the combination of Eric Ebron and Pat Freiermuth at the tight end position will definitely demand more volume than what the tight end position demanded last season. Juju, I think, is going to be in a very similar role, given the fact that Juju did provide more on a per target basis than Diontae Johnson. So all of this adds up to the fact that Diontae Johnson, if he had a 25% team target share last year, that target share is going to go significantly down, as it makes a lot of sense to. Now, not only is that target share going to be going down for Diontae Johnson, but at the same time, the Pittsburgh Steelers were actually first in the NFL last year in pass attempts per game, and it wasn't even close. So you throw in the fact that they draft Najee Harris. This is a team with a very good defense as well, and we're not going to be expecting them to skew nearly that pass happy again this upcoming season. So just say the Pittsburgh Steelers are still a top 10 offense in passing attempts per game, but they can scale back dramatically. They can still scale back about 15% of their overall passing volume and still maintain their top 10 status in their pass attempts per game. So you assume that 15% of the pie is automatically going away. Then you assume that that pie is going to get more divided in the tight end room. It's going to get divided over to the running back. It's going to get divided over to the second year wide receiver. And Diontae Johnson, all of a sudden, he has a smaller piece of a smaller pie than what he had last season. And I will say that there was a path for Diontae Johnson to actually smash his fantasy value this upcoming year. That path was for Juju Smith-Schuster to leave this situation and open up those targets for Diontae Johnson and for this team to draft an offensive lineman in the first round instead of Najee Harris. So we go through and you track the Diontae Johnson ADP through the course of the offseason to see if we think that the price has been corrected enough. And before Juju was signed, before Najee Harris and Pat Freiermuth were drafted as well, you actually had Diontae Johnson as the wide receiver 15 in fantasy drafts. So yeah, after the Juju signing, he definitely did fall. He fell down to the wide receiver 19 where he is currently being drafted. And that was before the Najee Harris. That was before the Pat Freiermuth draft picks coming in, both options that are going to get targets in the passing game. I understand, especially with Pat Freiermuth, you're not expecting a tight end to come in and be fantasy relevant in year one, but he can definitely come in and see a very similar role to what you had with Cole Kmet last year and just get a small piece of that pie. And Najee Harris, we've already talked about him. I mean, he had over a 12% team target share at Alabama, so he's a more than capable pass-catching running back, way better than what you had with Benny Snell last year. So Najee Harris is going to be taking away even more targets. And with them going and drafting a tight end that can block, with them going and drafting a workhorse running back, it shows this team wants to run the ball more. So naturally, you would expect Diontae Johnson's value to continue to fall in fantasy drafts. Naturally, you would continue to see that fall from just say the wide receiver 29 to possibly the wide receiver 24, wide receiver 25. But here's the problem here. Not only did he not fall down to the wide receiver 25, he didn't fall at all. He stayed at the same spot that he was at before. So with Diontae Johnson, this draft price right now makes no sense. It has to come down. And I know a lot of people don't necessarily like me just coming out and talking about a player being overvalued. So we are also going to be talking about players I would rather have in fantasy instead. And the guy going right after him in wide receiver rankings, at least in wide receiver ADP, is going to be DJ Moore. And DJ Moore, in my opinion, is a much, much better option. Now, I understand DJ Moore has been in the NFL a season longer, but he's actually younger than Diontae Johnson, as funny as that is. In this past year, I will admit, Diontae Johnson was more productive than DJ Moore. Diontae Johnson finished with 14.9 points per game compared to DJ Moore's 14.1. Now we have to understand that DJ Moore at the beginning of the year was being miscast in a deep role with Matt Rule and Joe Brady, their first time coming into this Carolina Panthers situation. But that got fixed halfway through the season. You saw the average depth of target come down for DJ Moore to where he was running more crossing routes, where he was running more slants with what he's been comfortable before. And then you saw the production go back up. And what we really want to look back on is 2019 with how dominant DJ Moore was. So 2019, when DJ Moore was only 22 years old, he actually came out, and if you take away the week that he left with an injury, he was the wide receiver 10 in points per game. So DJ Moore has already showed us the potential to be that wide receiver 1 in fantasy. I think you can make the argument that now with Sam Darnold, he could potentially have the best quarterback play of his entire NFL career. I mean, compared to a Cam Newton with the shoulder injury, compared to a Teddy Bridgewater. And obviously, I know a lot of people want to say, but Mason, how do we know that Sam Darnold's a better quarterback than Teddy Bridgewater? Well, talk to the Carolina Panthers. Talk to the team that had Teddy Bridgewater in their organization, decided to pay his entire contract, ship him out for literally nothing, and then go give a second round pick to bring in Sam Darnold. I mean, that tells us that Sam Darnold, most likely a better quarterback than Teddy Bridgewater. So all of a sudden, this situation, taking away Curtis Samuel, adding in Sam Darnold, is going to be much better for DJ Moore. So DJ Moore, a wide receiver that with more talent, with a improving situation compared to Diontae Johnson, take DJ Moore instead. And if you don't want to go wide receiver there, well, it's completely fine. Go running back. Go grab Kareem Hunt with that pick. Because here with Kareem Hunt, I mean, you're drafting a running back that you're going to be expecting low-end running back 2 production with whenever Nick Chubb is healthy, given his usage in the receiving game. I mean, we have seen with Kareem Hunt last year, him averaging 2.5 receptions a game. This season before, he was actually able to average close to 3.5 receptions a game. So we know Kareem Hunt is going to have the usage in the receiving game. And we also know that Kareem Hunt, while last year he only finished as the running back 23 in points per game, we have seen before that Kareem Hunt does have access to that elite level ceiling back in 2017, his rookie season, when he did get a full year to be the feature down running back. He averaged 17 carries a game, 3.5 receptions a game, 111 total yards, and he had 11 total touchdowns through 16 games. Now, I think we can all naturally assume that if Nick Chubb went down, you would be expecting Kareem Hunt to jump up to easily being a top 10, a top 8, a top 5 running back behind the best offensive line in football with nobody else in that backfield to take touches away from Kareem Hunt. So yeah, I mean, I am expecting Diontae Johnson to finish as a low-end wide receiver 2, high-end wide receiver 3 in fantasy. I would easily prefer a Kareem Hunt who has the floor of being a low-end running back 2 in fantasy and the ceiling of being a high-end top 5 running back in the case of a Nick Chubb injury. So yeah, I mean, instead of drafting Diontae Johnson, go get DJ Moore, go get Kareem Hunt. It's honestly not even that hard. Now, thank you, my dudes. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. Of course, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a ton, and I'll see y'all with the video tomorrow. I want to give a big thank you for everyone joining the flock over there on Patreon. In Castro, Brian, Mike, Jay, Samuel, Billy, Rocky, Bailey, Zachary, and Andrew. Thank you, my dudes.